Hello everyone, happy Tuesday and welcome back to another soap making video. We are continuing with the British soap making theme and today I'm making the Warren. So this is the last week in the British soap making theme and I've learned a lot. It's been tricky and don't get me wrong, I can't wait to get back to making soap as an American soap maker without the restrictions that UK soap makers face. I feel very privileged to have the freedom to use the ingredients that I want to use without having to get everything assessed and adhering strictly to assessed recipes. So let's turn to making this soap. I've added my lye water solution to my oils and they're both sitting a little bit cool around 90 degrees. I'm using my spatula and I've mixed that to emulsification and I've separated off the right amount for the weight of my embeds to use separately. I'm splitting the rest of my batter into 3 equal parts. This soap is going to be another layered soap and have 3 layers. I'm coloring the first bucket with turmeric. It's going to be a nice golden orangey color to that particular layer. The next layer is going to have spirulina in, so it's going to be a nice grassy green color, and that's going to be my top layer for the Warren. And the last layer is the kale and clay, and that's really going to whiten up my base recipe and it's going to help anchor the essential oils into the soap. The essential oils that I'm using are rosemary and lemongrass, so this is a really nice herby one and it's very kind of grassy. It's a nice one for like fields and springtime. And it's actually the first essential oil blend that I ever made when I learned to make soap, and it is one of my favorites. I'm using my stick blender to blend up the first layer, and that's going to be my white soap. So I'm going to bring it to a medium to thick trace with my stick blender. I have extruded all of these cute little bunnies and those are going to sit in my soap in the layers. So I'm going to start with the green bunnies and those are going to sit right on the bottom of my molds, and I am placing these in the molds facing me and they're all going to hopefully face in the same direction, and I'm spacing them out as evenly as I can. Now I haven't put any soap in the bottom of my mold at this time. I want the bunnies to sit right on the bottom of the mold. It does mean that when I pour my soap in I'm going to have to be a little bit careful not to move these embeds around. Alright, it's time to start pouring that soap. So my soap is at a medium to thick trace here, and I am going to pour it evenly across the mold so that the embeds have an even amount of soap between them, which should stop it moving the embeds around at all. Alright, now I've got most of my soap in my molds as evenly as I can. I am going to give them a little bit of a wiggle to level out the surface of the soap and see where I need any more soap and make sure that I have got them as even as possible and make sure that my embeds aren't going to move around too much. So I've got that nice and flat. I'm just going to add in the rest of the soap from my bucket to complete this layer, and I'm going to scrape out this bucket so I'm not going to come back to this. And I'm going to give it a nice little wiggle again and a tap down to level off the top of this mold and get rid of any air bubbles that might be in amongst those little bunnies. I let this set up for about 4 or 5 minutes and hope that it will support my embeds. So I'm adding those right on top of the previous ones to get them as evenly spaced as I can. And the white soap hasn't quite set up enough to support these as much as I would like. They are supporting them enough, but I'm not going to put the next layer of soap on just yet. I don't want the weight of that to push down these embeds any further into this bar. Alright, with all of those embeds in my soap, I'm moving on to the next layer while the previous layer sets up a little bit more. And this is my turmeric layer, so I have stick blended that to incorporate the turmeric, and I've just added a little bit of my essential oil. The lemongrass in the essential oil does cause the layers to set up pretty quickly. That's why I haven't added my essential oil to all of the layers in the beginning. I'm just doing it as I stick blend the layers. I'm going to use my stick blender on this layer to bring the soap to a medium to thick trace. I need the soap to flow around the rabbits, but I want it to be thick enough to support the embeds and to set up pretty quickly so I can get onto the next layer in this bar. I am pouring off a tiny bit of soap, and I'm going to use that for piping on the embeds that are going on top of this, and we'll have a look at that later on. I've poured some of my soap into this smaller container so that I have a bit more control. I can get this closer to my soap, and I'm pouring right on top of my embeds. And I'm using the embeds to break the fall of the soap batter, and I'm allowing the soap to move down and around the embeds and fill in any air gaps that are in there. I'm going to repeat that process on each of my molds until I have soap completely surrounding my embeds. Now that I have most of that soap in there, I'm just going to add the rest of my soap in from my large bucket and get it as evenly distributed between the two molds as I can. And once again, I am going to scrape out this container because I am not coming back to the orange, other than that little bit that I have set aside previously. So I let the soap set up for about 10 minutes and it has formed a nice layer on it. So it's time to add the last layer of embeds, my little yellow rabbits. And these rabbits are facing the same direction as the ones on the bottom are. So I'm going to have the top and the bottom row of rabbits facing one direction and the middle row facing the other way. So it looks like they're going back and forth along the layers of their burrow. This layer has set out nicely, so it is supporting all of my embeds pretty well. I'm pushing them down into the soap a tiny bit just to get soap up into the front feet of the rabbits, but not so far that they're going to cause a break in the layer. Now that I've got those rabbits in, it's time to start working on my green soap. And this one has been sitting for a little while, so some of the soap around the edge had started to sponify more than the soap in the middle. So I am mixing that in with my spatula to thoroughly distribute all of that soap and oils. And then I'm going to start using my stick blender to bring it to a medium to thick trace again. And it's time to pour this last layer into my mold, and I'm going to repeat the process that I did on the previous layer. I'm pouring the soap right on top of the embeds and letting it flow between the embeds and push out any air gaps that might be there. I'm going to get this as evenly distributed amongst the two loaves as I can, and once again scrape out my container. Alright, on to the bunnies. These guys are going right on top, and I have my little plate here of bunny butts and bunny ears. So it's going to look like the bunnies are diving into their warren and poking their little heads out. So I have a Wilton 6 piping tip, which is just a small round piping tip that I'm using to create the little pads and toes of these bunnies. And I'm using a lighter pressure to create the toes and a stronger pressure to create the little pads on the soles of their feet. Now that that is all done, I'm going to use the back of my spoon to create the texture on the top of these soaps. Now the embeds are right under the surface of this soap, so I can't go very deep down like I normally would. It's a very shallow texture. I did start by only pulling the texture in about a third of the way on either side. However, I figured that I would prefer to have the texture going all the way into the middle so that my little bunny butts can sit on top and the ears can be planted right on the side. Now my bunny butts that I've created are a little bit over an inch each, so they are going to have to go on the soaps after they are cut tomorrow. So for today I'm going to go ahead and finish texturing the top of the soap and then start working on the ears. So as I'm placing the ears onto the soap, I am piping a little bit more of that orange soap right down the middle to look like the center of the rabbit's ears, and then placing them in my soap. So each bar will have one bent ear and one straight ear, and this is what they look like. Aren't they so cute sticking out from the top of that soap? I think they're just adorable. Alright, we're back the next day and it's time to cut this loaf. I'm so excited to cut this one. I hope that it's turned out great. Alright, I've lined up my multi-bar cutter so that all of those ears are on a bar and they're not going to get cut at all. And let's have a look at the inside. Oh, I am so pleased with that. Look at those little bunnies going back and forth along the tunnels of their warren. They're so cute, all lined up together, and I love that they are all sitting on the previous layer all nicely in a row, and none of them have broken through. You can really see the definition of the ears in the embeds, and those ears sticking on top are just adorable. They just look just like a rabbit is sticking his little head out from the burrow. Here's a close-up look at them again. With those little ears and all of the bunnies lined up, these guys came out so well. So it's time to start adding the bunny butts onto these, and I'm just adding a little bit of soap to the top of each bar to act as a glue. And then I'm going to place one of the bunny butts on each of the bars of soap. And they're just going to perch right there looking like the bunny is diving down into the warren, while the other one on the other side is poking his little head up to see what's going on. Now, most of my bunnies are still missing their tails, so with that, some more of that white piping, I am going to just put a little fluffy white tail with a square piping nozzle onto each of those bunnies. And here is a close-up look of the finished bar. Look how cute they are diving down into their warren, and the little fluffy tails and those ears sticking up. They're just so cute. I'm going to finish up this video as I usually do with a close-up look at some pictures of this bar. Those colours came out really nice and vibrantly, and the little bunnies are adorable. You can still see all of the definition in them. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I'll see you next Tuesday.